So this talk is about reducing stress and increasing focus using guided meditation. So a big problem currently is, I think, technology, but is the increasing amount of information that comes at us in our world. So I remember my uncle telling me years ago, his company lives in Arundel, works in London, gets the train every day. His company kept saying to him, it'd be great if you had a work laptop, because imagine how much work you can get done on the train to and from work. And his thing was, no, my work starts when I'm at work. It doesn't start 2 hours earlier when I'm leaving home and finish 2 hours later when I'm arriving home. My work is what it is. And he tried to be really boundaried around it. And obviously, as workloads increase and stress increases and your need to get jobs completed and hopefully not have it playing on your mind when you're trying to have family time and all these sort of things, meant that he got a work laptop and he works on the way to work and he works on the way home from work, adding 4 hours of free work to every day. And I think that kind of thing happens to a lot of people, that technology means that people know, oh, you can just do that little bit of extra work. I was reading a study the other day that said, this study was quite an old study, so it said in the study, or in what I was reading, actually it's probably a lot worse than this now, but it said that it takes less than 6 seconds between getting a notification on your computer screen that an email has arrived and checking to see what that email is. And that was something by a guy called Dan Ariely, which is, he does sort of social psychology type stuff and behavioural economics. And he was realising that he's getting thousands of it, he's quite well known, so he's getting thousands of emails a day. That's thousands of times that he's thinking, I'll just see who that was. And just, he doesn't reply to them all, but the fact is he's not sticking to doing what he's doing. He's constantly I'll just check. And that obviously every intrusion stops you just focusing on your job that you're trying to do. So although those are work-related things, obviously there are things in our everyday life as well. You know, when we're at home, you receive text messages, you receive phone calls. Most people, especially younger people, receive less phone calls nowadays. It's more text and people just typing to each other. But the same sort of thing applies, that we easily get distracted by Facebook, by Twitter, by everything tries to hook you in. Marketers are brilliant at what they do. They try and hook you in. So you can be in the middle of reading something, say someone shares an article on Facebook, you read that article, and then at the bottom of the article, there's a bunch of other articles that says, like, you know, the 7 things you should never say to somebody who's stressed. Wonder what they are. So you then click through and now you read them. And at the bottom of that article, it will say, you know, the 10 reasons why celebrities don't like being famous. Oh, wonder why they don't like being famous. So now you click through to that. And before long, you've just wasted a huge amount of time doing stuff that you never planned on doing and not doing the stuff that you really wanted to get done. And given that some things we have to do, like housework and things, aren't necessarily the most exciting things, aren't things that really make you think, I can't wait to do the vacuuming today or something, because that's not kind of, they're not that motivating. It's much more fun to read something that you found on the internet than it is to get round to doing what you really need to be doing. The same in work, there's a lot of tasks we should be doing, but some things are more fun than others, and it's easy to distract yourself. I write books, and so it's very easy to think, I've sat here for 3 hours writing, and something's come through, and I just think, great, there's finally an excuse to stop writing, finally an excuse for me to focus on something else and distract myself. The same as, for me, takeaways are a big problem. You know, you get home, and you think, yeah, we don't really have much time, we're really rushed, so a takeaway would be a better option. Let's have a takeaway. So all of this stuff, life being made easy, it's too easy to make decisions that make our lives even easier rather than do the things that perhaps we should be focusing on and doing instead. So I think this idea of the stress being caused largely because of overwhelm, because of too much to do, too much information coming in, we have that, and then you've got the whole focus issue off the back of that, that you're now very stressed, you now feel like you don't have enough time to complete the things you're supposed to be doing, you're constantly feeling like you're running 2 steps behind where you need to be, everything just feels so overwhelming, and then you're trying to focus on doing something and you're always being distracted. So even if you're not getting stressed by certain things, you're constantly being distracted. So one thing I quite like using as an example is people that drive and trying to park cars. If you're trying to park a car and you've got the radio on and you've got passengers in the car and it's a really small, difficult to park in parking space, even though you don't necessarily need your ears to park the car, and so it shouldn't be a problem having the radio on or having a passenger talking to you, the reality is you feel uncomfortable because you're trying to park a car with someone sat next to you and you know you're struggling a bit. So that's already playing on your mind. So you're now talking to yourself in your head and saying, oh, it's going to be embarrassing if I can't park this, and driving for 30 years or whatever you're saying to yourself. So you're doing that in your head. Then you've got perhaps thinking they're going to judge you and all these things. Then you've got the fact that the music's on, so that's distracting you. So the more distractions you can get rid of. So I remember being with somebody who wanted to park at the old Aqua Arena down the road, and they had to park between two pillars, and they just had to tell, it was while I was working in children's homes, and they had to tell all the three kids in the back who weren't being quiet, and me, had to tell us, all four of us, to get out the car and go into the pool, and they'll park it on their own with no distractions, because that's what we need. And that's where things like meditation comes in really handy, that you just need to be able to, you need to learn those skills. I think anyone under about 35, 40 probably has grown up with this, and so they're more used to it. Anyone older than that has grown up in a time where life was much simpler, where you didn't have a phone on you. I can't even remember how I coped to be able to meet someone in town without being able to text and say that I'm running late, or without being able to text and say, can we meet at this place instead? Somehow it worked. I don't remember it ever being an issue back then, but obviously it's weird. But young people don't know this. So I think some of us are used to the fact that there is a different way. There is a way of life that you could lead differently. So meditation comes in two different directions. You've got mindfulness-based meditation, and so with that it's about detaching from things, so being non-attached to other things. So for example, if you're in a situation like public speaking and perhaps it could make you feel anxious, then by accepting that there's perhaps feelings going on in your body, but not attaching to them, not getting drawn into them and then giving judgments to them and thinking, oh, I feel butterflies in my stomach and I feel this, and by not doing that and instead just acknowledging, yes, there's feelings there, but that's fine, they come and then they go, and you just carry on, you just do what you do, and it doesn't matter that those feelings are there. So then you're being mindful of it, you're just being aware of it, but you're not attaching to it, you're just letting it just float. You're just letting it float past. Then you've got focused meditation, where you're actively choosing to focus on one thing. So you're trying to narrow your focus down from jumping it around, because even though people say they can multitask, all the research on multitasking is actually, it doesn't really exist. What you're doing is you're jumping your attention from one thing to another. You're not necessarily doing more than one thing at a time. So unconsciously, you can multitask. You breathe, your heart rate, your heart keeps beating, you keep dividing cells, you manage to, I'm standing upright, I'm talking, I'm managing to multitask unconsciously. But consciously, it's really hard work to try and multitask. So what you normally do is actually, you jump your attention from one thing to another. You don't focus on everything at once. That's not how it works. But with focused meditation, what you're doing is saying you'll want to narrow that focus down so that you're focusing on one thing for a longer period of time. So rather than take someone who's doing an office job, rather than think, I'm brilliant at multitasking because I'm talking on the phone and then I'm eating my lunch and I'm typing an email to someone at the same time. But what they're doing is, right, I'm listening now for a minute, but my fingers have stopped typing, or they're finishing typing a word if you unconsciously know, like if you can touch type or something. And I'm pausing my bite while I do that, and then while they're talking on the other end, and I've stopped talking, I'm eating, so I'm partially paying attention to them, but actually I'm eating my food and not paying a full attention to them. So that's really what happens with multitasking. Whereas to be really efficient, what you do is, if that phone call is important, your attention is on that person on the other end of the phone call. So I do psychological therapy with people, And when someone's sat in a room with me having therapy, they are the only important thing in the world. Nothing else in the world matters in that moment. They have to be 100% of my attention, because actually that's what's important. They are there to be helped. They're not there for me to be in my head thinking, what do I want for dinner tonight? What am I going to do tomorrow? They're not there for that. They're there for me to give them 100% of my attention. They're not there for me to be judging them and for me to be talking to myself in my head saying, that's a bit weird what they've just said. Or they're not there for that. They're there for me just to be devoting that moment to them. And some people find that really difficult. Obviously, therapists, you get clinical supervisions to help you to be able to achieve that kind of way of doing therapy. But meditation really, really helps. So how I came by doing meditation was accidental. As I mentioned, I've got Asperger's. I was diagnosed as an adult, but obviously I'd had challenges all my life. And when I was a small child, probably about 7, 8 years old, I grew up in Warningcamp, which is a tiny little place outside of Arundel. Burpham down the road is more popular because at least it's got a pub. Warningcamp doesn't have anything at all. It's just essentially a hill. That's really all it is there. And I've got 3 brothers. We lived in the country. We had some ponies. Had some dogs. We had cats. We had rabbits and all these other things. Life was very, very hectic. And so I used to try and escape that. And my way of escaping was to run off into the woods. And I'd climb up into a tree, tie myself to a tree. I didn't used to tie myself to trees. I used to just sit there, and then I reached an age where I thought, oh, you can fall out of trees. So then I attached myself to the tree just in case I fell. But I used to climb up into trees, and I'd start trying to pinpoint different sounds. So I'd close my eyes and listen and try and recreate the outside world inside my head. So I'd start thinking, right, I can hear, say, a robin in a tree. Where is it? Right, so that's over there. I wouldn't obviously be talking through, but this is what I was achieving. Where is it? Right, so it's over there. I can hear it over there. And what does it look like? How high in the tree is it? And I'd be doing all this, focusing my attention, and that would stop me focusing on feeling anxious, focusing on feeling overwhelmed by all the sensory input that was going on. It just helped me to narrow that right down to one thing. And so I got very good, in nature at least, at being able to do that, narrow down to just one thing that I could pay attention to exclude having all the rest of the sensory input on me. And obviously, as I've grown up and hit adult life, that's continued being very helpful. So that was sort of my early first kind of experiences with meditation. I didn't know it was meditation. I was doing it purely because it helped me relax. It just happened. I didn't think, oh, I know what might help is this. I just, as you do, you're in a situation, you close your eyes and you think, oh, I've got to relax. And then you find things that help you. And after that, as I grew up, I started learning about meditation in my very late teens, probably 18, 19, and have carried it on ever since, learning about different types of meditation and looking for similarities and differences between them and seeing what works. And I think the important thing is that everyone's different. So some people find, say, focused meditation easier than mindfulness. Other people find mindfulness easier than focused meditation. So everyone's different in what they find works. But what I found really difficult was, unless I was in the middle of having, say, anxiety or something, where I had that motivation to need to do something about it, I found it difficult to meditate. So if I just was at home and I thought, I'm going to do 5 minutes of meditation a day, and I sat down and closed my eyes, within about 30 seconds, I'll be doing something completely different, because I will have paused for a moment, and that would have given me time to think of something I really want to do instead. And so I wouldn't actually meditate. So I found guided meditation for me was the thing that helped. Was if you're guided, then, so I used to use initially cassette tapes and then CDs and MP3s, and I obviously make a lot myself as well. So if you're being guided, you don't have to do the thinking. You can just follow along to something rather than do the thinking for yourself and think, say, if you're doing a focused meditation, focusing on a word or a phrase or something, you've got to keep bringing your attention back to that. And that's harder to do when you're thinking, I've got to keep bringing my attention back to it. It's easier if, say, you're sat with someone who says, okay, just say this to yourself, and anytime you notice your mind wander, just bring your attention back. Having someone else do that for you is really helpful. It's a bit like anyone who has tried to keep fit and thought, right, I'm going to do some exercising, to just decide, I'm going to go for a run now. That's really hard. To go for a run with a friend is much easier because I can't be the one that stops. And so both of you just keep going. Or you have a personal trainer or something. Again, that's even better because now you've got someone that not only makes it so that you keep going, but you now keep going and actually push yourself. You've got someone there to guide you and help you with it. So I think things where you're guided are much easier than things where you're doing it for yourself. And so what I wanted to do, you've got a parasympathetic nervous system and a sympathetic nervous system. So that's essentially your stress and your relaxation response, both parts of your autonomic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system is essentially like the relaxation response. It increases digestion, it helps with long-term survival processes within your body, whereas the sympathetic nervous system is more about immediate survival. So it's more about there's a stress happening and you might have to get into a fight or flight state and save yourself. And both of them are linked to your breathing. Obviously, breathing is sort of the one thing that's automatic. You do it every day without thinking about it, but you can also control it. You can also decide to breathe in. You can decide to breathe out. So it's something that's under your control as well as it being an automatic process. So what's really interesting is that the stress response is linked to breathing in and the relaxation response is linked to breathing out. So if you breathe out longer than you breathe in, that makes you more relaxed. So you can all try that in a moment. There's a technique called 7-11 breathing, and the idea isn't to end up going red in the face because you've ran out of oxygen and you can't breathe out any longer. So don't count really, really, really slow. The idea is to count at a speed that you're comfortable breathing at, which is going to be different for everyone. So someone who naturally breathes really slowly, obviously their counting is going to be much slower than someone who breathes really fast as a natural way of breathing. So, but the important thing with 7-11 is it's just a bunch of numbers. It's just to say the 11 is longer than the 7. So you breathe out longer than you breathe in. So if you'll close your eyes a moment and you can give this a go. And just have a sense of breathing in, counting to 7 to yourself. And then doing a nice long, deep breath out, counting to 11. And then breathe in, counting to 7. And out, counting to 11. And some of you may notice that it perhaps makes you get a slight lightheaded feeling. But it just helps you become more relaxed. And then you can open your eyes. And the interesting thing is that long-term stress causes so many health problems, like irritable bowel syndrome and all these sort of things, because obviously the idea is that the stress response is about short-term survival, and so it shuts down long-term survival. You don't need to be optimally prepared for procreation if you're about to be eaten by a lion. You need to be running away from the lion and getting yourself safe. So just like you don't need to be worrying about digesting your food if there's a good chance that in the next 5 minutes you're not going to be alive anymore. So what you need to do is make yourself safe. But in today's world, where stress happens from lots of different ways that are not really life-threatening, as would have been, say, thousands of years ago, or perhaps even hundreds of years ago, and the sort of lives people led and struggles people had, you get this stress response that's shutting down long-term survival processes while it thinks you're under threat of needing to survive here and now. And so suddenly you get stomach problems because your digestive system isn't working, because you're operating as if there's threats to your life. And so what you need to do is to use things like relaxation to just put that balance back in your favour, so that you can improve like your digestion, you can improve, sex life improves when you're not stressed, and all these sort of things, because of the fact that they're long-term survival things. So becoming relaxed has huge health benefits on us, as well as obviously lowering blood pressure and things like that. And so that was something, that breathing is something that I used to do. Again, I didn't know that there was an actual term for it or anything. That sort of breathing I used to do when I hit secondary school. And my first day of secondary school, primary school, I was in a school with about 32 pupils in the entire school. It was a really small school at Arundel. And secondary school was about 1,500 pupils, so slightly more than 32. And it also was a much, much bigger school, really confusing, really difficult. It's like suddenly there's just people everywhere and it's really overwhelming. And so my way of handling it was to go inside my head, try and escape it all, and just breathe, breathe, and just try and focus on breathing. Just something that meant I wasn't focusing on all of this noise and this chatter that I couldn't understand, because obviously everyone's talking, and so you can't pinpoint any one sentence or any one person. It all just sounds like a lot of noise. And so that's how I came by initially breathing in that way. And smokers breathe in that way naturally as well. So smokers regularly think that they're having a cigarette to calm themselves down, but actually nicotine is a stimulant, so it doesn't calm you down, it excites your body. What calms you down is that when you have a cigarette, you go and you do a long out breath, and you do that while you're smoking for say 5-10 minutes. All of a sudden you've just spent 5 or 10 minutes essentially doing a relaxation technique while you fill your body with toxins. And then 15-20 minutes later, you're suddenly hit by the nicotine, which you had been counteracting with your breathing, and you need another cigarette because the nicotine's a stimulant, and so you suddenly feel a bit wired and you think, I've got to have a break again, and so you suddenly need to have another cigarette. So in a moment I'm going to guide you through a meditation, and it will take into account some mindfulness-based stuff and some focused stuff. So I like trying to weave it all into a story. I don't use scripts or anything. I just talk at you and see how you're responding, to see whether the kind of thing I'm using is working for you. I think that's the beauty of doing guided meditation if you do it for yourself, is that if you're prepared to, I know listening to your own voice can be uncomfortable if you're not used to listening to your own voice, but if you're prepared to, it's easier to do your own guided meditations than to use someone else's, whether it's mine or whether it's anyone else's, because then it's tailored exactly how you like it. So some people like, for example, lots of silence and lots of space between things. Some people like perhaps going on a beach, others like going in the woods, others like, say, climbing a mountain or going, sailing on a lake or on the sea. So everyone likes totally different things. So if you do it yourself, then you're going to have much better success at thinking, I like what I'm following. But you have to get used to your own voice, which can be weird. I'm very used to my voice, but it can be weird when you start. And if you do it for yourself, you can then get the pacing just right. And it really is easy. All you have to do is think, right, what kind of a journey can I take myself on? And how can I narrow down some attention and make it so that I stop talking to myself in my head, so that my body relaxes? How can I do these sort of things? And the best way to do that is, if anyone's reminisced about a good holiday before, when you're reminiscing about a good holiday and you're absorbed in that, and you suddenly, say you're sat at home, I don't know, having a cup of tea, and your mind just wanders and you start thinking about something from the past that's a pleasant memory, suddenly your body feels deeply relaxed. You're not thinking about your body feeling deeply relaxed until you come out the experience, but your body starts feeling relaxed because you're not paying attention to tension in it at all, because you're in your head. You're not worrying or thinking negative thinking because you're focusing on this pleasant memory or this pleasant experience from the past. And time seems to disappear. You can suddenly think, oh, I've been sat here for 20 minutes and I just felt like I just closed my eyes, or just felt like I just gazed off just for a moment. So it's that kind of experience. If you can have something where you're following something and letting it absorb you, and you've got some detail in it, that's sensory detail, it's much better and more engaging than, say, oh, relax your head, relax your shoulders. It is a good thing to do, but it's not as enjoyable internally if you're just told to focus on different parts of your body and relaxing them, and then told to perhaps focus on your breathing or something like that. It's much nicer to think, oh, I love being on that beach, or I love being in the woods there, and I like to know what that tree sounds like. So that's the kind of thing that I will do with you now. So hopefully all your phones are off, definitely on silent if they're not off, and ideally not on vibrate, because having a phone vibrating is equally as irritating. And then if you make sure your legs aren't crossed. And in reality, there's no specified way of having to sit, but if you've got your legs crossed, there is a chance that you can cut off the blood circulation to the top of the leg, and suddenly you can get pins and needles, and that can obviously be distracting, so it's just a comfort thing. And then you can just let your eyes close a moment. And with your eyes closed, just like when I was in the woods as a child, and I'd have my eyes closed, sitting in a tree, and I'd be listening, trying to find a sound to pinpoint my attention on to start with. And just like that, in here there's the sound of air flowing. And if you listen closely, there's the sound of traffic. There's other sounds from throughout the library. And so you're able to be aware of those different sounds, and able to be aware of focusing your attention. And so you can take a moment to imagine yourself walking through a meadow towards some woodland. And as you walk through the meadow, so you can notice what the grass looks like. You can notice what wild meadow flowers there are, different colours. Perhaps the movement of the grass and the flowers as the breeze blows across them. And that intriguing way that butterflies fly from plant to plant, where they kind of bob up and down in the air as they flap their wings. And it looks really inefficient, but they seem happy enough, just going from plant to plant, without a care in the world. They're not focusing on the past or the future. They're just going from plant to plant now. And the way that bees fly to plants, pollinating the plants. Again, just doing what bees do. And you can walk through the meadow towards the woodland. And as you walk, each footstep will have a certain sound to it, a certain feel to it. They there'll be a certain sound to the way the feet move through grass. And if it's a warm, sunny day, there can be a certain warmth on your face, like a bright, comfortable warmth on your face, on your skin, perhaps warming your cheeks, perhaps making them go a little rosy. And relax. And if you gaze up in the sky, you can notice how clouds can just drift by, drift and float by. There can sometimes be grey clouds and sometimes white wispy clouds, sometimes clouds like cotton wool, just floating and drifting by. You're able just to watch that happen as you continue walking to the woods. And the interesting thing as you enter a woodland path is how some of the light passes through the leaves of the trees and dances like beautiful shards of light on the path in front of you. Dances and flickering light. And the leaves have a certain rustling to them as a breeze blows through the trees. And the temperature can take on a coolness in the shade as you walk along the woodland path. And off in the distance there can be a stream you haven't yet discovered, just trickling away, comfortably trickling away, whether you're there or not. And you can continue walking along the path towards the stream, and at some point beginning to be aware of hearing the stream trickling in the distance. And hearing sounds of birds. And different types of birds you get in woodlands. Perhaps noticing the odd squirrel scurrying up the bark of a tree, darting along, darting around with its fluffy tail. And you know what the bark of a tree feels like by just reaching out and running your fingers along it. And then as you arrive at a stream, so you can sit down under a tree, watching the clear water flow by. And as the clear water flows by, you can notice how light twinkles and sparkles on the surface, and see a bridge some way downstream, and see some children playing on the bridge. And they throw some sticks in the stream and have the sticks racing by. And you know the sticks can race by, bobbing up and down, twirling around. And as you gaze into the water, it's almost like you can be lost in the moment. bubbling, sound of the stream. Rustling trees. Where you can become absorbed in the moment. Where you know all of that is going on, and yet you're not necessarily focusing on any one thing. Almost like your eyes are just defocused. You're just in that zone, in that moment. And a part of you can remember this feeling, because it's really helpful to always keep in mind that this feeling can just come through your body and your mind when you need it in your everyday life. Perhaps just when you take a couple of minutes for yourself to close your eyes, drift inside, do a few 7-11 breaths, making each out-breath longer than the in-breath. And I don't know whether it would be in a minute or two that you would think, I feel more centered now, calmer now, more able to carry on with the day. Or if it's at bedtime, whether you just do that and find yourself comfortably falling asleep. And in a moment, you can have a sense of standing up from underneath that tree, walking back through the woodland out to the clearing, out to that meadow, and taking a deep breath of that meadow air, and bringing yourself round and opening your eyes. That's it, and then all coming back to the room. So obviously that was just a brief, I think 13 minutes or something according to the clock at the back, guided meditation just from a meadow into some woodland. It's reasonably easy to do that kind of thing. It's just getting the voice right, I think, so that you're not intruding on someone's inner world, hopefully, too much. You're letting them be there and you're just in the background. And if you do that for yourself, it's the same kind of thing, that you don't want to be sort of screeching at yourself or something. You want it to be calm and relaxing and like, I'm just here to guide you. I'm not here to intrude, and so doing that for yourself. So, any questions, comments?
Your voice was very good, I thought. Very effective. Are those books of yours with the guided meditation, one would have to read them oneself, so your eyes wouldn't be closed, would they?
You read it, you record yourself, so you read it to, nearly every mobile phone nowadays has an MP3 recorder, so you can record it to that and then just press play to play it back. You could read it to someone else. I had someone the other day say to me that they'd got the book and they said to me, I was just reading them and kept sort of finding myself feeling relaxed, just for reading it. So although they didn't close their eyes or anything, they just read it how they would read it. Like if you're reading it to intentionally do it to someone, they said I just read it sort of to myself, so my eyes were open, I was just reading it, and they found themselves nice and relaxed, because obviously they're doing everything relaxing. They're talking in a relaxing way, they're reading it in a relaxing way. So obviously that's not as good as being guided, because you're not, it's easier to do things like visualize. A lot of people struggle with visualization. People are quite good at having a sense of something, but most people, it's not like you have a high definition theatre inside your mind for most people. So some people do, and I envy them, but most people just have a sense of something, and then the more you practice, the more automatic it becomes, and the more automatic it becomes, the better it becomes, your sort of visualizations. Likewise, normally the more detail you ask for, the easier it becomes to do it. So if they are trying for the detail, it doesn't work. So if you try to imagine what a stream looks like, you probably won't be able to imagine what a stream looks like. Whereas if you're just following along, then as time goes by, you just start getting it more. In the same way that if I said to people, what colour's your front door? All of you could probably know what colour your front door is, and the only way you can know that is if you can create a representation of it in your mind to be able to tell me what colour it is. But you probably don't consciously think, oh yeah, I just saw a red door in my mind. Yeah, you don't think that, but you had to have done that. So it's always there, everyone can visualise, it's just that it's not like it's something you're necessarily consciously overly aware of. So if you just read it to yourself, it would be relaxing. If you have someone read it to you, so if you've got a partner or something who can read it, so my wife quite likes me reading meditations to her. Again, I don't normally read them because I can do it without reading it, so I just do a meditation talking. But if you've got a partner or someone who likes having it read to them, then it can be read to them. If, say, you are doing it for groups, so if you have someone doing group meditations, you could then read it to the group. So anything like that, then obviously you can just read it to them. But it's designed, it was written predominantly for personal use. So it was written that I found that actually I couldn't find meditations that I wanted talked by other people. And so I thought, well, if I just write a book of them, then there's something that you can say, right, let's read this to a dictaphone or to my mobile phone or whatever, and listen to it back. But if you're not comfortable with your own voice, again, get a friend or a relative or someone, or a partner or someone to do it for you. And if you don't mind their voice, you might have a friend who think they're just like, if I'm ever stressed, they're the one who has the voice that I could listen to calm me down. We'll get them to read it. Most people have, like, I've worked in social care type of work for most of my adult career, and it would be quite a stressful job for people, and people would see me and I'd be talking calmly. I'd be talking like this. This is my normal way of talking, which isn't helpful if I'm trying to overly motivate people and make people feel lively, but it's very good if I'm trying to calm people down and relax them. So staff who struggled with, they've just had a stressful time, would just be talking to me, and all I'm doing is think, that sounds like it's really difficult. And they think, oh, I feel so calm and relaxed now. And it's just because I'm saying it in this kind of, saying helpful things, hopefully, but also just talking calmly. So if you know someone who has that kind of voice that you think, that's the person I'd want to read it, get them to record it for you. Any other questions?
I'm just amazed at what I've heard you say, because 30 years ago, as a health visitor then, this is exactly what I was doing with the mums. We did antenatal classes, and they enjoyed it.
And I have done all these sort of things with teenagers, with challenging behaviour, with parents, with adults, with all sorts of different people. And so far, some people get a bit, especially in a group setting like this, a bit sort of, am I the only one with my eyes closed? Do I look like a complete idiot here? We have these sort of thoughts when you start doing something, especially if it's thrown upon you and you haven't really got to know anyone else in the room yet, and all these sort of things. But yeah, I think everyone should learn it. Schools should implement it more. And if you're confident enough to do it with people, even cynical people will just go with it. So it's a bit like from doing family work, it's a bit like if you have to suddenly talk about sex with a teenager. And if you're there thinking, this is going to be uncomfortable, because it's going to be uncomfortable for them, so they're going to probably act stupid and joke and stuff. But if you're just kind of, let's bluntly get on with this, then they accept that as, oh, well, if you're comfortable to do this and talk about this, well then so am I. So it works. So when I've worked with teenagers who abuse their parents with physical and other forms of abuse, and these are kids who you'd think they would never sit in a room with other kids who are exactly the same as them, all with their eyes closed, listening to some guy at the front droning on about, say, walking through the woods or something, and yet they love it. They go with it. But when other staff did it, if those staff were thinking, oh, I'm going to look so stupid, I don't normally talk in this calm, relaxing way, I'm a youth worker, I'm lively and bouncy, and I don't normally talk calmly. Well, then the kids pick up on that, and then they don't go with it, and then they start playing up and messing around. But if you're thinking, well, actually, I'm comfortable to do this, then if any kids open their eyes, that's fine, don't stop, just carry on. It makes no difference at all. If they open their eyes, you just carry on. So I think in all sectors, from antenatal stuff through to working with parents, the biggest thing, I've written books about parenting and all sorts of things like that, held numerous courses, and the biggest thing I always say and teach right from the outset is relaxation. If a parent is already really, really stressed, they're not going to think clearly. Stress makes you thick. Stress makes it so that you see black and white. It shuts down your higher cortex. It makes it so that you don't suddenly halfway through an argument stop and think, actually, you're right. I've just realised. You argue your point, never mind how wrong you are. So because stress stops you thinking clearly and stops you seeing other people's perspectives, it's not helpful when you're dealing with, say, parenting issues, where the child you want to be calm and relaxed so they see the parent's perspective, and the parent you want to be calm and relaxed so they can see and understand where the child's coming from. And from running numerous courses, normally both sets of people fundamentally want the same thing. They just see it from their perspective of one being an adult and one being a child, and then they argue over that perspective and don't realise that there's a lot they agree on if they could just speak the same language for a little bit of time. So relaxation is something that I teach to all parents. I think parents should know it, and I think it's not taught enough. So you don't grow up knowing how to relax necessarily. You find interests that help you relax, but then your interests and hobbies are normally the one thing that you put aside when life gets too busy, even though actually that's when you need to do more of it. So if you love, if you love sailing, suddenly you think, I don't have time to go sailing because I'm too busy with work. But sailing was the thing that kept you grounded and kept you sane and kept you, able to handle the work. Or if you love country walks, thinking, I can't waste today doing a country walk because got too much on. Well, actually, you need the country walk, because then that stuff you've got on, you'll do it far more efficiently and better and make more use of your time. So if I'm stressed trying to write a book, it takes me much, much longer to write a book if I'm stressed, because every other line I'm deleting the line again and rewriting it and deleting it and then getting more stressed with it. Whereas if I think I'm just going to go to the woods today, and then the next day I carry on writing the book, I can write maybe 15, 20, in fact my maximum was I think 27,000 words I wrote in the day, which sounds a lot, but actually it's only like about 30 words a minute when you work out how many hours I'd actually spent doing that. So it's not very fast typing, but I was just flowing. I wasn't stressed. I'd had some days of chilling out and making sure that I was in a calm, relaxed state, and so it just flowed and it was easy and effortless. So any other?
So do you meditate every day?
I listen to guided meditations every single day, and I do techniques like breathing and stuff like that every single day. So when I get on trains, I often find nowadays that they're normally very packed, and that's overwhelming. You've got people essentially crushing you in there, and you're standing and you'd rather be sitting and have some space. And when you're sitting, the trains nowadays, you have the back of the seat in front there, whereas it used to be sort of there somewhere. So you feel like you're just trapped and you've normally got someone sat right here. And so just getting on trains, going into shops, I have to do things that take me inside my head and shut out the outside world and focus on relaxation. So I use the various techniques every day. And guided meditation I probably listen to at least once a day, normally every bedtime, because I don't worry. I've never been a worrier particularly, but I come up with ideas all of the time. I can't stop my head from coming up with ideas. So, I remember in the 90s I came up with an idea thinking, I downloaded my very first ever MP3 back in the late 90s, and it was a laughing version of Elvis Presley's laughing version of
Was it The Wonder of You?
no, it's the one where he has to talk in it, but whatever it was, and I'd always been after it. It's not on any album that I could find, so I bought, I found it on as an MP3, got that and thought, wow, I actually got a song from the computer in front of me. It did take a very long time to download at that point, but I was so impressed, and I thought, this is going to be the future. People are going to buy music online. And so right away, all I was doing was obsessing about, got to design a company for being able to have downloadable music, and everyone around me was like, no, that's never going to catch on. You get CDs in shops. Why would people spend 3 hours downloading each song from the internet? It will take off. It's going to be huge. It's going to be brilliant. We've got to do this. And so that's the kind of thing my brain always does, that something in life makes me suddenly think, I've got to work on this. I've got to come up with that. And again, in the 90s, I thought that e-readers were going to be huge. There was research going on about creating e-paper that had no glare. And so again, I became obsessed with that and thought, I've got to be able to, this has got to be designed. You can then read books and have hundreds of books on one little tablet. And again, I didn't invest in it, and that's a huge thing now. I know, yeah. But yeah, so my brain is always thinking like that every single night. So the only way to shut it up is to listen to a meditation at night. And I like long meditations. So this was about 13 minutes. Ones I listen to at bedtime would be about an hour long, because then I know at some point during the hour I'm going to fall asleep. So I listen to it intentionally to fall asleep, not just to relax, but something I've got to follow, that's got some detail in it and me guiding myself through the detail, so that it shuts my head up and stops me talking to myself, and then at some point during the hour I'll just naturally fall asleep, and that's fine. So there was...
Have you taken this idea into the workplace? Have you been invited by large companies to...
Not many. When I worked for... I've worked for West Sussex County Council, I've worked for Arran District Council, and both of them I've done wellbeing things around meditation for, especially around parenting and family workers, for things like the Family Resource Team, the Think Family teams, Family Intervention Project. So all these things where they're going out and dealing with people who are highly stressed, and obviously with the wellbeing teams and things like that. But most other companies, I think some would. It's definitely something that they should do, because stress, I think the last figure I read, this was very old research, was something like £6 billion a year is spent on people being off sick due to stress-related illnesses. So, yeah, it's a huge problem. And I know that working for the local authority, many of my colleagues were off with stress-related illnesses on long-term sick, and it was a huge issue. So.
What's the youngest age of a child that you think could do this?
I personally think any age, as long as it's tailored to that child and their age. So, for example, I've got a sequel to my Sleepy Bedtime Tales book, which is called Relaxing Tales for Children, and it's about relaxation, not about... So it's, again, 11 stories, the same characters, so that there's some level of familiarity, but it's all about relaxation rather than making them fall asleep. And that's targeted at 4 to 7-year-olds approximately. So the idea was that they're more likely to listen to a story that's got a character in it, and it's like there's Patches in the doghouse. So Patches, the dog, wants to play and is really hyperactive, but everyone else just wants to chill out, and it's like, no, go away. And so the story is about Patches trying to play and what have you. So it's things that kids hopefully would like. There's Polly the princess who saves the prince from a dragon. There's all sorts of stories that I think are child friendly, but the whole point behind them is that they are designed to help kids to relax rather than it just being something the parent or a teacher or whoever reads in a very lively voice, bringing in all the characters. They're designed having the same kind of bits that we did here, so there's some kind of a journey, something to take someone on. There's elements of detail so that you've got things to focus on while you're listening. It's read in a soft, gentle voice. There's all these sort of elements, but it's a story. So if it's for someone under, say, 7 or 8, I would probably go with telling a story to them, because that's what they're going to like, that's what they're going to engage with. They're not going to, I can't imagine a 4-year-old necessarily, there's always exceptions, but I can't imagine a 4-year-old necessarily wanting to listen to me talking about going through a meadow and wanting to listen to going into the woods, and because that's not going to be, they'll get bored and they'll open their eyes and then want to do something completely different. But I can imagine them being fascinated by a ghost clown at a circus and wanting to know where this ghost clown came from and what happened next, and listening along to that. So I think it works with any age, but you have to make sure it's tailored to that age. Likewise, it works with people whether you've got ADHD or Asperger's or whatever. That doesn't matter either, but you've got to tailor it to them. So if someone in this audience had ADHD, the chances are they would have found that too slow for them and not enjoyable enough, not engaging enough. But if I said, we're going to go rock climbing, you know, I'm going to do a talk about rock climbing, and you're going to get to the top of Mount Everest, and you're going to get the view at the top of Mount Everest, and then you've got to get down quick, so why not jump off with a parachute? And you know, there's a quick way down. Someone with ADHD would probably find that enjoyable, thrilling, and something they can follow. So you know, that's the kind of thing I would then do with them. I wouldn't do a deep relaxation sounding thing, because they're not going to relate to it, and if the person listening doesn't relate to it, then it's not right for them. Just like one person said to me in relation to one of my YouTube videos, I didn't listen to this relaxation thing to be taken through the woods. I want traffic, I want city life, I want stuff that makes me feel relaxed. Well, yeah, they shouldn't have listened to one that was, I think it was a woodland walk or something. They shouldn't have listened to one called a woodland talk if they wanted a woodland walk if they wanted a city adventure. But to them, relaxation was being in a city and having the sounds of a city. So everyone's different, and it's just about getting it right for the individual. Anything else?
You've spoken about the mindfulness side of meditation. There's a sort of meditation where they use a mantra, or
Yeah, so focusing on something.
does that work in the same way, or is it better for some people, some it's better for
I think it depends more what you're trying to achieve. So I had just written down here what I would say would be the biggest advantage for both directions. And I think mindfulness is very good for stress reduction, although it can cause you a lot of stress if you're not used to it. So this isn't often talked about, I don't think, on many meditation courses. But because mindfulness isn't technically about relaxation, it's in the Western world, I think we've got mindfulness-based cognitive behavioural therapy, things like that. So it's been linked with the idea of relaxing, but actually mindfulness itself is just being aware but not attaching to things. And the thing is, say you're someone who has a really bad anxiety problem and you spend most of your day trying to push everything away, you know, the stuff that's negative that wells up in you, you try and push it away by getting on with work and ploughing yourself into work and doing this and doing that. You never stop, because you know if you stop, that's going to slap you in the face. All of that bad stuff that you know is there is going to suddenly be there. And then all of a sudden you're told to do mindfulness, and all of a sudden the one thing you're aware of is all the bad stuff that's always been there. It's just now that's the only thing that's in your awareness, because that's the state you're in. So mindfulness, when you're new to it, can be very overwhelming if you're someone who's got a big sort of anxiety problem there somewhere that you spend most of your time trying to push away. But the idea is that, especially if you work with someone around mindfulness, that you can then get used to the fact that yes, that's there, those thoughts are bubbling up and those feelings are bubbling up, but you don't have to attach to them. So you can learn from the mindfulness point of view, you can learn not to attach to them. So I think as you learn that and you get better at it, that's very good for stress reduction. It's very good for making it so that things happen in your life, but it's like, yeah, things are happening, but all I do is I handle them. I don't have to think, right, I'm handling this, but I'm worrying about it as well, or I'm handling this, because I think that's an extra level on, an extra layer on top of any problem. Say you've got depression, and the depression's caused by the fact that you're deep in debt and you're struggling, you're at risk of losing your job, and if you're depressed because of all of that, and then all of a sudden, you've got all those problems you need to deal with, but you've got depression on top of it. And so I think if you use something like mindfulness, it's very good at being able to make it so that you've got the problems still, but you don't have the depression on top. You're instead able to look at the problems and just address them for what they are, impartially, which is why, say a financial advisor is much better at saying, right, I can see you need to make that change, and that change. Or a therapist is much better at saying, right, I can see where you need to change your life, but the person in the middle of it, in the thick of it, struggles to see that. Whereas I think focused meditation is very good for developing your ability to narrow down your focus on one thing. So it makes you more productive, it makes you better at being able to do a better job at something. So if you wanted to learn to play the piano, and while you're learning to play the piano, you've got the TV on in the background, because you think, I've been told to practice scales. That's so boring, I'm going to put the TV on while I'm practicing the scales so that I can watch TV while I'm doing it. Suddenly you're doing the scales, but you're watching TV. You're not really dedicating your focus and attention to doing the scales. So when you do focused meditation, it can help you to learn how to be able to draw your attention back to one thing. So if your attention wanders, that's fine. People's attention does wander, but you recognize that and you bring it back to one thing. So it could be, again, if it's guided meditation, I try and draw both in. So there'll be bits where it's mindful and you're aware of things happening, but you're not really attaching to them, they're just there. And then there'll be focused bits like you reach forward and you touch the bark on a tree and you notice what it feels like and you run your fingers around it. And so you're learning from both. You're learning from narrowing it down to focusing on one point, and then you're learning to, right, now let's just be aware of everything but not attached to anything specific. But you could do both separate. So it could be that you focus on or whatever kind of word or sound you want. It could be that you focus on, I've got little solar powered animals. My wife loves the little solar powered animal things that you put in your window. And so we've got loads of them. And so that's something to focus on. I can have one of those, I can pick out, we've got about a dozen or so on our windowsill, but I can pick out one of those and then focus all my attention on just the ticking of that one. Even though there's a ticking of a dozen, I can focus on just the ticking of that one. And anytime my mind wanders and I get mixed because it's sort of going tick, 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 tick of all of them, I can then go back to focusing on just that one tick. So that would be me doing a focused meditation, just using something naturally in my environment. So you could do that. You could be a tick on a clock that you choose to focus on, and any time your attention wanders from it and you start thinking to yourself or whatever, bring your attention back to it. Just recognize it. Don't beat yourself up about it or anything. Just recognize it's happened. And then over time, it gets easier and easier to keep that focus on one thing. And obviously it just then makes you so much more productive, because then if you write a book, you're just writing a book when you're doing that job. You're very good at just doing that. If you're in an emergency, you're very good at just thinking, right, this is what we need to focus on and do now, not flap around and think, what if something goes wrong, or what if you don't do that? You just think, right, this is what I'm doing. So you get much better at controlling your focus in everyday life because you've been practicing holding that focus longer. And I think in today's age where everyone wants things quick, so there was some research done on the length of a scene in a movie, and back in the 70s, any one movie scene was, I think it was something like 4 minutes or so of one camera view. Now it's something like 8 seconds before it changes scene, because viewers get bored. And yet I actually find it really annoying when the camera constantly is jumping from one place to another in a film. I find that really, really annoying. I just want something nice and calm and static, and I want long scenes. But I'm sort of the exception. I think older people may well, sort of people my age and upwards, may think the same kind of thing, that they prefer longer scenes. But the younger people coming through want really fast scenes. I have a YouTube channel, and people will click off a video within about 6 or 8 seconds if it hasn't already got their attention. Even if actually you had to do some introduction to what's about to follow, they'll think, oh, bored already, and they'll turn it off. So I think it's even more important for kids nowadays to learn focused meditation, so they learn to be able to hold their attention on one thing. And people with ADHD, they struggle to hold their attention, but they can hold their attention on Call of Duty, the computer game, for sort of 10 hours straight without wavering from it. And yet you put a bit of maths work in front of them, and they're flicking rubber bands across the class and causing all sorts of mayhem. So you can absorb their attention, but it's just, that's sort of really the benefits for that it increases that ability to focus. So anything else? Oh, we'll stop there. Oh.
I remember being in a work situation once, and I was very calm, and I had a different point of view from everyone else, and I was very calm when I was putting this point of view, and I wasn't going to deviate from it, because I thought what they were thinking was plain wrong, really. And my God, the aggression that I got from all these people, and I found when I went away, it was quite hard to keep this very calm inner feeling, and I wonder often it's a question of how you deal with other people rather than how you deal with yourself.
Yeah, I would say it's always how you deal with yourself. I would just sit down. My first day working in residential children's homes, I used to work in mental health initially, with people with schizophrenia, manic depression, things like that. Then they were changing the rota, and so I said, well, on the day the rota changes, I will no longer be doing this job. It seemed to me to be an arbitrary change. So I left the job and took a job working in children's homes. Walked in on my first day, they said, oh, just turn up, come around the back door will be open, come around the back, come in, and there'll be staff around and they'll take you to the office. Came in the back door, and a teenager grabbed me by the throat, pinned me to a wall, said, who the F are you and what the F are you doing in my house? I thought, oh, I've quit a job for this. That's good. So I've been used to dealing with reasonably aggressive, had been cut with a knife because I wouldn't let someone slit someone's throat, hung by a noose, stabbed with broken glass, all sorts of things, and never ever lost my temper in any of these situations. And this was a daily occurrence, multiple times every day. And it was just the fact that I was focusing on me and not them. I was focusing on controlling me and thinking what they do is what they do, what I do is what I do. And someone, throwing their rattle out of the pram and getting angry because their perspective isn't the one that's happening, well, that's up to them. It makes no difference to me how much that annoys them. They're the one getting annoyed. Just from this bit of information here, they're the one who's making it so that they're likely to have health problems from stress and stuff. It doesn't bother me. It's their choice. But things you can do are sitting down. If you sit down, it's a calming act. It's much harder to be angry when you're sat down. The first instinct when you're angry is to jump up out your chair and want to be up in someone's face and want to be demonstrating I'm bigger than you, I'm aggressive, I'm a threat. The same if you're scared or you're getting anxious. Again, it's the natural instinct is to be standing so that you can run away. If you're trapped, obviously you sometimes make yourself small and try and freeze, but if you're sitting down, the natural instinct is to want to jump up because you've got to escape, because you're at risk. But if you can stay sat down and control yourself and keep sat down and let your shoulders slump, ignore anything about good posture, just think, let my shoulders slump, feel the weight of my arms, suddenly, because you're keeping yourself relaxed and your body language is relaxed, it's very hard for what's going on inside you to then turn that into anger. So that's what I always do. Right, got some books down here if anyone is interested. So thank you.